Welcome to Lecture 1, What is a Stroke? Now, for your brain to function, it needs a constant blood supply, which provides vital nutrients and oxygen to the brain cells. A stroke happens when the blood supply to part of the brain is cut off and brain cells are damaged or die. So, some key points about strokes. First of all, it's damage to part of the brain. It's caused by a problem with its blood supply. Blood is supplied through arteries. There is a blockage or bleed. A stroke usually happens quickly and strikes suddenly, a brain attack. The number of strokes across the UK is likely to rise by almost half, 44%, in the next 20 years. That's not me saying that, that's according to a new report published by the Stroke Alliance for Europe, SAFE, S-A-F-E, and the Stroke Association. In the UK, there are currently 1.2 million people living with the effects of stroke, and there are over 100,000 strokes every year. The report also reveals that by 2035, the number of new strokes across Europe is likely to increase by a third, about 34%. The number of stroke survivors living in the UK is expected to rise by a third, 32%. Juliette Bouverie, who's the chief executive of the Stroke Association, said, and I quote, "The number of stroke survivors is set to rise by almost 1 million people. And that number in the UK is expected to increase by over 30%. That is one of the largest increases in Europe." Now, these are shocking figures, and if they're borne out, health services will face a formidable challenge in tackling the stroke epidemic. So, let's talk about risk factors. One main risk factor is said to be whether you had a previous stroke. Now, by previous stroke, I mean a full-blown stroke or maybe a TIA. TIA stands for Transient Ischemic Attack. I had a TIA, it lasted 5 seconds perhaps, 10 seconds, on the 23rd of March in 2016. It's a mini stroke. But for the purposes of trying to prevent strokes, a mini stroke is seen as a full-blown stroke. In other words, after any kind of stroke, there's an increased risk of another one. Approximately 15% of ischemic strokes are preceded by a TIA. 1 in 12 people will have a stroke within a week of having a TIA. The greatest risk of recurrent stroke is in the first 30 days. Approximately 30% of stroke survivors will experience a recurrent stroke or TIA. My TIA, as I said, was over a year ago. I've had no recurrent stroke, but I have made a huge number of lifestyle changes. Most studies state between 25% and 33% of all strokes are recurrent strokes. Now I want to deal with something about TIAs. In the introduction, the first video that was launched, I said that some of what I said might be seen as controversial. I'm not saying everybody everywhere is going to agree with what I say. So, TIAs, I quote, "The symptoms are very similar to those of a full-blown stroke, but they only last for a short time. Anything from a few minutes up to 24 hours. If you've had a TIA, you will recover completely within a day." Unquote. Remember, along the screen at the bottom now, you can see the sources of these quotes and various websites and comments throughout these lectures. Remember what I said, you will recover completely within a day. But this is untrue. It is untrue that the effects of the TIA will completely disappear, i.e. there will be a complete recovery. Again, I quote, around 70% reported that their TIA had long-term effects, including memory loss, poor mobility, problems with speech, and difficulty in understanding. 60% of people stated that their TIA had affected them emotionally. Again, I quote, However, some people were left with some residual symptoms that lasted a few weeks, and some people continued to experience some symptoms for a while afterwards. Commonly, these included arm and limb weakness or numbness, slurred speech, memory problems, confusion, and visual difficulties. In most cases, the symptoms improved over time. Some people experienced just one residual symptom, whereas other people had a combination of different ones. Some people whose initial symptoms included slurring of speech or forgetting how to speak normally found that afterwards they still had some problems. Conclusions: more than a third of patients with TIA, remember, more than a third of patients with TIA have impairment of greater than one cognitive domain within 3 months after their TIA. The affected domains fit in the vascular cognitive impairment profile. So, it is misleading to say that you will recover completely. Secondly, when you look around the internet, you look at risk factors, as I quoted, you see previous stroke and TIA. And I did actually query the Stroke Association. I stress again, I am not speaking on anyone's behalf except for my own. I did query with the Stroke Association. And I said, this TIA, how temporary is it? And do you get any long-term effects? And will it make you more likely to get a stroke in the future? And they told me that there's never been any research that shows that having a TIA of itself increases your risk of having another TIA or a full-blown stroke. This, in fact, makes perfect sense given the complete recovery statement. Yes, there are long-term effects, as I've outlined, but of themselves, they do not increase your risk of stroke. It is true that the conditions causing the TIA, and that's the important thing, causing the TIA, if unchanged, will increase your chances of getting a stroke, but not the TIA itself. As I said, in my own case, I had a TIA March 23rd, 2016. I would suggest that my current risks, 2 stones lighter, non-drinker, more exercise, changed diet, means I'm actually less likely to get a TIA or a stroke than before. In fact, to support that, I put my information into QRisk2, the address is along the screen now, and indeed my risk is substantially less. So therefore, I would suggest it is wrong to list a TIA of itself as a risk factor. It's also wrong to say that people will recover completely. What will happen is if you list a TIA as a risk factor, it causes stress, causes worry, and that of itself may cause you to get a stroke. So let's be clear about this. In trying to prevent a stroke, it's important that we identify things that are risks and do something about it, things that are risks that we might not be able to change, and things that we think are a risk but actually aren't, as long as you know the background to them. Having said that, stroke or mini-stroke is a medical emergency. If you suspect someone is having a stroke, act fast, F-A-S-T, and check for facial weakness. Can the person smile? Has their mouth or eye drooped? Arm weakness. Can the person raise both arms? Speech problems. Can the person speak clearly and understand what you say? Time, the T, F-A-S-T, time to call 999. Or if you're in another country, 911 or whatever the emergency services are. So remember that, F-A-S-T. But why act fast? Well, by calling the emergency services, you can help someone reach hospital quickly and receive the early treatment they need. Prompt action can prevent further damage to the brain and help someone make a full recovery. A delay can result in death or long-term disabilities such as paralysis, memory loss, communication problems. So, takeaway point. any signs of a stroke, act fast. So in terms of preventing a stroke, be aware of what is a risk and what isn't a risk, and what causes something to be a risk, and whether you can change it, which leads us on to lecture 2.